Hannah and Nolan Colbert were the kind of couple people admired quietly, sometimes even envied. Married for 4 years, they still looked at each other as if the world outside their bubble didn't exist. For them, love wasn't just spoken. It was practiced daily in the little rituals they created and protected. Nolan's life was a storm of deadlines, investors, and innovation. As CEO of a tech startup that had grown to 300 employees in just a few years, his days often stretched from sunrise into the night. Yet even in the middle of expansion plans and late-night board calls, Hannah remained his compass. He often said she was the one thing he could not delegate or reschedule. Hannah, meanwhile, juggled a demanding career of her own as an HR representative at a logistics company. Her schedule rotated monthly, sometimes mornings, sometimes evenings, sometimes the night shift. It could have pulled them apart, but instead, it only sharpened their determination to stay close. They never allowed their careers to eclipse their marriage. If anything, the demands forced them to be creative with their time. Date nights were carved into calendars like sacred appointments. Weekend getaways, even if only a drive an hour away, gave them pockets of adventure. When schedules clashed, they filled the gap with text messages and stolen video chats, reminding each other that the other was always present, even in absence. There were nights when Nolan would still be at the office, bleary-eyed from back-to-back meetings. Hannah would show up with takeout, quietly slipping into his office with a smile. Sometimes, she would sit down the hall during his late meetings, scrolling on her phone or reviewing HR paperwork, just so he could look up and see her waiting. He never failed to thank her with that tired grin she loved, proof that her presence was the only recharge he needed. And there were mornings when Hannah's alarm blared at an ungodly hour, her shift starting before dawn. Nolan would stumble into the kitchen, hair tousled, insisting on making her coffee, no matter how badly he needed more sleep. "Go get them, Mrs. Colbert," he would whisper, pressing a kiss to her forehead. They were far from perfect, but they were intentional. Their love was not built on grand gestures alone, but on a steady rhythm of effort. They had learned early on that marriage wasn't about who had the busiest schedule. It was about always choosing each other. Every single day, Nolan Colbert had built his reputation not just on intelligence and grit, but on integrity. Ambition ran deep in him, but never deeper than his devotion to Hannah. Investors often tested his resolve, pressing for shortcuts, urging him to cut corners, or even suggesting endless hours that left no room for a personal life. Nolan refused. "If success means losing my wife, then it isn't success," he once told his board. Those words weren't just a declaration, they were a promise. As the company expanded, the workload multiplied. Nolan knew he couldn't do it all. That's when Catherine Dotson entered the picture, a sharp, confident consultant with an impressive resume. She was brought in to streamline operations and smooth investor relations. At first, her presence felt like relief. She handled tasks Nolan no longer had the bandwidth for, and her polished solutions impressed the team. But slowly, Catherine began to linger. Meetings stretched longer than necessary. She started anticipating Nolan's schedule, showing up with reports before he asked, offering to save him the trouble. Small things, a coffee placed on his desk, a remark about his tie, a suggestion that she could sit in on conversations to make things easier. To Nolan, it was efficiency. To Hannah, it looked like intrusion. Hannah noticed the subtle shifts, the way Nolan's phone buzzed later in the evenings with Catherine's follow-up messages, the way her name came up more and more in conversation. Catherine handled that. Catherine suggested this. Catherine already sent me the data. It was never malicious, never improper, but it was constant. Nolan, blind to the undercurrent, only saw progress. What he didn't see was how Catherine's quiet persistence was building a wedge between his careful boundaries, slipping into spaces he had once reserved only for Hannah. Hannah had always been practical, the kind of woman who could see through excuses and read between the lines. She was patient when it came to Nolan's career. She had to be, given the demands of his growing company. But patience had its limits. and she felt them tightening with every cancelled dinner, every rescheduled date night, every "I'll make it up to you" that never truly came. It wasn't hard to trace the change. The shift had started the moment Catherine Dotson joined the team. Catherine was efficient, yes, but she also seemed to consume more of Nolan's time than anyone else. She insisted their projects were on sensitive timelines, that only Nolan's input could finalize decisions. At first, the pattern was too sharp to ignore. One evening, Hannah set the table for two, only to receive Nolan's text. "Can we move dinner to tomorrow? Catherine needs me for a call with the investors." By the time Nolan got home, Hannah was waiting. "This is the third time this week," she said firmly, her voice steady but edged with frustration. "Every time we plan something, Catherine suddenly needs you." Nolan loosened his tie, sighing. "Hannah, it's not like that. She's doing her job. You're overthinking this." Her eyes narrowed. "Overthinking? Nolan, I've always supported you, even when your hours were insane. But I told you from the beginning, I won't be second to anyone. Not to investors, not to deadlines, and certainly not to Catherine." What started as a calm conversation quickly spiraled into heated words. Nolan, feeling cornered, accused her of being unreasonable. Hannah, unwilling to back down, reminded him of promises he had made about boundaries. Their voices rose nightly after that, arguments replacing laughter, tension replacing tenderness. For the first time in their marriage, the Colberts felt distance pressing between them. Catherine Dotson knew how to read people, and Nolan Colbert was no exception. She had studied him from the moment she stepped into the company. His restless energy, his drive to lead, and the soft spot he carried for those who made him feel valued. She saw what others missed, the pressure weighing on him, the cracks in his calm exterior, and she knew how to press her advantage. Whenever Nolan's temper flared in meetings or investor calls, Catherine was there with a gentle touch. She would place her hand over his, stilling him, leaning closer than necessary. "Relax, Nolan," she whispered once, her voice low and reassuring. "You're doing fine. You just need someone who understands the weight you carry." He didn't pull away. Once, when talk of Hannah came up, Catherine would smile knowingly. "It's common, you know," she said lightly, brushing her fingers across a stack of papers. "Wives often struggle when their husbands spend so much time with another woman. But don't worry, I'll be leaving soon, unless, of course, you need me longer." And one evening, worn down by endless demands and Hannah's mounting frustration, Nolan let slip words he would later regret. "I'm not sure I could survive without you," he admitted. Catherine's lips curved into a slow smile as she leaned in. "Then I can stay as long as you need me." Something shifted in him then. For the first time, he saw her not just as a consultant, but as a woman who made him feel understood, wanted. He didn't intend to cross any line, but Catherine made it so easy to blur them. One evening, they were scheduled to work late at the office, crunching through investor updates. But Catherine tilted her head and said, "You've been carrying too much. Let me take you out. Just dinner, you deserve a break." Nolan hesitated, but when she smiled, warm and knowing, he agreed. They ended up at a local upscale restaurant, tucked into a booth with dim lighting and the hum of quiet jazz. Laughter came easily between them, and when Catherine reached across the table to touch his hand, Nolan didn't pull away. He leaned forward, their smiles mirroring each other's in a moment that looked far too intimate. Across the room, unseen by Nolan, one of Hannah's friends froze at the sight. Her hand flew to her phone. "I see your husband. He's with another woman." Hannah's heart pounded when she received the message. She texted back immediately, "Send me a picture." Moments later, her phone lit up with the image, Nolan and Catherine leaning in, hands entwined, smiling as though they shared a private world. Hannah's hands shook, but her voice remained calm as she typed a message to her husband. "How you doing? Are you coming home soon?" Nolan glanced at the screen, guilt tugging at him. He couldn't tell her the truth, not after canceling so many dates. "Still at the office. Be home in a couple hours." Seconds later, her reply cut through him like a blade. "Attached was the picture. Good. That gives me enough time to pack." You'll then have your freedom to pursue whatever you have with her." The blood drained from Nolan's face. For the first time, he realized what he had truly risked: Hannah. The moment Nolan walked into their bedroom, the silence was deafening. Hannah's side of the closet was half empty, drawers pulled just enough to show something had been hurriedly taken. But it was the small detail on the nightstand that made his knees buckle, her wedding ring glinting faintly under the soft lamplight. His chest tightened, the air heavy. He picked up the ring, staring at it, as if willing it to mean something else. This couldn't be happening. "Hannah!" He whispered into the emptiness, his throat burning. He grabbed his phone, dialing her number, straight to voicemail. Again and again, no answer. He tried her closest friends, hoping she might be with them. But each response was the same: silence or a gentle, "I haven't seen her." Nolan sank into the edge of the bed, running a hand through his hair. Her family. He thought of calling, but his stomach twisted. What could he say? "I pushed her away," I lied. "I let another woman take too much space, and now she's gone." No, that wasn't a conversation he could start over the phone. Resolute, he grabbed his jacket and called his assistant. "Clear my schedule for the rest of the week. Tell them it's a family emergency," he ordered, his voice sharp, final. Before the assistant could ask questions, he ended the call. Minutes later, he was in Hannah's car, the one she loved for its practicality over his luxury models, driving out of the city. The road stretched long ahead, each mile heavy with regret. Hannah had always spoken fondly of her hometown in Mississippi, a small black community that barely made it onto maps. She told him once, "Everyone knows each other. They protect their own. They'll smile at strangers, but they watch carefully, especially when someone like you walks in." Nolan's grip on the steering wheel tightened. He knew they had been worried when she married him. A white man from the city, with ambition larger than life. And now, showing up broken, without her by his side, he didn't know what reception to expect, but none of it mattered. All he knew was that he had to get her back. The long drive through back roads and fading daylight was a journey into unfamiliar territory. But as the signs of small-town life appeared, rusted mailboxes, corner stores with peeling paint, front porches lined with rocking chairs, Nolan steeled himself. He was about to walk into Hannah's world, and for once, he wasn't sure he belonged. The old screen door creaked as Nolan stepped onto the porch, his palms damp despite the cool evening air. Hannah's family home sat tucked between tall oaks, its weathered wood painted fresh every few years by careful hands. The house radiated warmth, but as Nolan knocked on the door, all he felt was the weight of his mistakes pressing down on him. David, Hannah's father, opened the door. He was a tall man, with a presence that filled the space even before he spoke. His sharp eyes swept over Nolan, already measuring him, already knowing. "She called," David said flatly, stepping aside just enough for Nolan to enter. "Didn't give details, but I could hear it in her voice. Something's wrong." Inside, the house smelled of cornbread and old wood polish. Nolan hesitated near the doorway, but David moved to his chair in the living room, a worn recliner that commanded the room, and sat down heavily. He didn't offer Nolan a drink, didn't ask if he was tired from the drive. Instead, he leaned back, his hands folded across his chest, his expression unreadable. "Talk," David said simply, his voice firm. "Why is my baby girl coming home, and what are you going to do to solve the problem?" Nolan swallowed hard, every prepared excuse falling away under the man's gaze. He lowered himself onto the edge of the sofa, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. "I messed up," he began. His voice cracked, but he pressed on. "There's a consultant at my company, Catherine. At first it was just work. She took on responsibilities, made my life easier. But then, lines blurred. She started taking too much space, and I didn't push her back. Hannah saw it. She confronted me, and instead of listening, I argued with her. I lied to her last night." David's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. Nolan forced himself to continue. "She caught me at dinner with Catherine. Nothing happened, but it looked wrong. And I lied to her about where I was. That's why she left. She left her ring behind. Sir, I was wrong. I love Hannah. I shouldn't allowed my arrogance and flattery blind me. I can't lose her." The silence that followed was crushing. Finally, David exhaled long and slow. I raise my daughters to know their worth, he said. Hannah don't need anyone who makes her feel like she's second. If you want her back, son, you've got to prove you're worth the vows you made. Nolan nodded, his throat tight. I'll do whatever it takes. David's eyes stayed on him, hard but searching. We'll see. For now, you sit here and wait. When she comes through that door, it'll be her choice if she wants to even look at you. The headlights swept across the front yard before fading, and Hannah's heart clenched when she saw her car parked in the driveway. Her chest ached at the sight, proof that Nolan was already here, waiting. She nearly cried right there in her mother's passenger seat, but she forced the tears back, clinging to the strength she promised herself she'd keep. Ruth glanced at her daughter as she put the car in park. Are you ready to face him? She asked gently. Hannah shook her head, her voice low. No, Mama. Ruth reached across, squeezing her hand. Come on, baby girl. Let's go inside. The front door creaked open, and Nolan leapt to his feet the moment he saw them. His eyes locked on Hannah, filled with regret and exhaustion. For a moment, the whole room held its breath. Nolan opened his mouth to speak, but Hannah raised her hand, stopping him cold. Not tonight, she said firmly, her voice trembling only at the edges. I'm too tired. She turned away from him, stepping straight into her father's arms. David kissed her forehead and whispered, Welcome home, baby girl. She nodded, her face pressed into his shoulder before pulling back. I'll be in my room. Good night. Without another glance at Nolan, she disappeared down the hallway, her footsteps heavy but steady. The silence left behind was thick, broken only by Ruth's soft voice. You must be hungry. Let me fix you a plate. Nolan shook his head, his eyes still fixed on the hallway. Thank you, ma'am, but I'm not hungry. His voice was rough, carrying the weight of sleeplessness already settling in. That night, Nolan lay on the sofa, staring into the darkness. Sleep never came. Instead, he paced the wooden floors, every creak of the house reminding him of the woman just beyond his reach. Morning light spilled across the porch as Nolan sat hunched forward, elbows resting on his knees. His eyes were heavy, shadowed from a night without rest. When the screen door creaked open, David stepped out holding 2 steaming mugs of coffee. Without a word, he handed one to Nolan. Thank you, sir, Nolan said quietly, his voice hoarse. They sat side by side, silence stretching between them. Birds called from the trees, the air filled with the small-town stillness Nolan wasn't used to. For once, he had nothing clever to say, no quick fix to offer. Finally, he broke the silence. I told my COO to run things until I get back, he said, his gaze fixed on the gravel drive. I'm not leaving without my wife. David didn't answer, but the weight of his listening pressed harder than words. Nolan sipped his coffee, grateful for something to hold in his trembling hands. The door swung open again, Ruth's voice cutting through the quiet. You two come eat, she called firmly. I'm not hungry, Nolan replied reflexively. Ruth's tone sharpened, a mother's command that left no room for argument. Get in here now! Nolan rose obediently, following David inside. The smell of eggs and biscuits filled the kitchen, but all Nolan saw was Hannah seated at the table. She looked rested but distant, her expression unreadable. He froze for a moment, then slid into the seat across from her. No one spoke. The scrape of silverware and the hum of the old refrigerator filled the silence. Hannah ate slowly, eyes cast downward, while Nolan stared at his untouched plate. Every moment felt like a test he was failing. The day passed much the same. Small exchanges, polite nods, but no real words between them. Nolan shadowed the house like a man tethered, waiting for Hannah to give him even a sliver of a chance. The next morning after breakfast, David set down his coffee cup and cleared his throat. Ruth and I are going to town for a while, he said, his eyes flicking from Nolan to Hannah. You two need to talk. The statement landed heavy. Ruth placed her hand gently on Hannah's shoulder before grabbing her purse. The front door clicked shut behind them, leaving husband and wife alone in the quiet house. No more buffers, no more excuses. The silence stretched long after Ruth and David left, heavy enough to press against the walls. Nolan sat at the kitchen table, his hands clasped tight, knuckles white. Hannah stood near the window, arms folded, staring out at the quiet street as if it offered escape. Finally, Nolan spoke, his voice unsteady but firm. "Hannah, I can't keep sitting here without saying it. I messed up. I didn't set boundaries like I promised I would. I let Catherine take too much of my time, my attention, time that belonged to you. And when you called me out, I argued instead of listening. That's on me, not you." Hannah didn't move. Her silence cut deeper than anger. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to go on. "That night at the restaurant. I swear to you nothing happened, but I know how it looked. I lied to you, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. You're my wife, Hannah, the one I prayed for, the one I built this life with. And I risked losing you because I didn't protect what mattered most. I'm sorry." His voice cracked on the last words. Slowly, Hannah turned to face him. Her eyes glistened, not with softness, but with restrained pain. "Do you know how it felt?" she asked quietly. "To see a picture of my husband smiling at another woman the way he used to smile at me, holding her hands. To be lied to when I already knew the truth." Nolan dropped his head, unable to meet her gaze. "I told you from the beginning," Hannah continued, her voice steady, practical as always. "I will not be second. Not to your company, not to investors, and certainly not to another woman. You made vows to me, Nolan, and I've stood by you through late nights, missed holidays, all of it. But when you chose her over dinner with me, when you let her cross lines, you broke something. What if it had continued, if you haven't got caught? How far would it have went? I'm not sure if I can trust you anymore." Nolan lifted his eyes, desperation raw in them. "Then tell me how to fix it. Tell me what I need to do, because I'm not leaving here without you. I'll walk away from the company if I have to. I don't care about the money, the growth. None of it means anything without you. Just give me a chance to prove it." For a long moment, Hannah studied him, her expression unreadable. Finally, she sighed, her shoulders sinking under the weight she carried. "It's not about words, Nolan, it's about actions. You can't talk your way out of this. You have to show me, day after day, that I come first. And if you can't, then you need to let me go." The words settled between them, sharp and heavy. Nolan nodded slowly, determination in his eyes. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life proving it." The battle for their marriage had begun, and both knew it wouldn't be won overnight. Later that evening, after the house had grown quiet again, Hannah slipped into the kitchen where her mother was rinsing dishes. Ruth glanced at her daughter's face, the guarded expression she wore, and dried her hands on a towel. "Come on, baby girl," she said softly, nodding toward the porch. "Let's talk." The night air was cool, the cicadas humming from the trees. Hannah sat on the porch steps, her hands resting on her stomach. For a moment she couldn't bring herself to speak. Then the words tumbled out raw and low. "Mama, I'm pregnant," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I had plans to tell Nolan the night I got that text from my friend. I thought it was going to be this happy surprise, something that would make us stronger. But now," her eyes filled with tears, "now I don't even know what we are." Ruth's expression softened, and she sat beside her, slipping an arm around her shoulders. "Oh, baby." She let Hannah lean against her, the weight of the secret finally breaking through her defenses. Through quiet sobs, Hannah asked, "How can I raise a child with a man I don't trust right now?" Ruth was silent for a long moment, her gaze stretching into memory. Finally she said, "There was a time, years back, when another woman tried to come between me and your daddy." Hannah's head jerked up, startled. Ruth nodded. "Yes, it happened. She wanted him for herself, tried to find cracks in what we had. But your daddy, he chased after me. He made sure she was left behind. It wasn't easy, it took time. Forgiveness don't happen overnight. But I knew where his heart was." Hannah's eyes glistened. "How did you forgive him, Mama?" Ruth reached up, brushing a tear from her daughter's cheek. "Time," she said gently. "And because I knew that woman wasn't stronger than what we had built together. But baby girl, you are not me. This is your decision. Only you know what you can carry. Just remember, whatever choice you make, it's not just about you anymore. It's about your child too." For the first time since she left Nolan, Hannah let herself cry openly. Ruth held her close, rocking her like she had when she was little. And in that moment, Hannah realized that love and forgiveness were never simple. They were choices, made over and over again. Hannah lay awake long after her talk with Ruth, staring at the ceiling of her childhood bedroom. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. "It's about your child, too." One hand rested over her stomach, protective and uncertain. She thought about how happy she had been, imagining Nolan's face when she told him they were going to be parents. Now the memory felt like a cruel twist. Could she still trust him enough to raise a child together? Or would she have to do this alone? Nolan sat on the edge of the sofa, his phone clutched in his hand. His body was stiff with exhaustion, but his mind refused to rest. He knew what he had to do, and avoiding it any longer would only make him look weaker in Hannah's eyes. Catherine's presence had poisoned his marriage because he had let her. With a deep breath, he scrolled to her name and pressed call. She answered on the second ring, her voice smooth. "Nolan, I was just finishing the report." "This isn't about work," Nolan cut in sharply. His tone was colder than she had ever heard. "This is about boundaries I never should have allowed you to cross." There was a pause, then a soft laugh. "You're upset. I understand. Wives get emotional when they feel threatened. But you and I both know—" "No." His voice rose, steel in every word. "We don't both know anything. I let you get too close. That's on me. But this ends now. I don't want your reports. I don't want your late-night calls. And I damn sure don't want your hands on me. We're done, Catherine." Effective immediately, her tone shifted, sharp and mocking. "So your wife found out, and now you're pretending you didn't enjoy my company." Nolan's jaw tightened. "I enjoyed the illusion of less stress, but you cost me more than you'll ever know. Don't call me again. If you need anything for the company, go through my COO. We're finished." He hung up before she could reply, tossing the phone onto the coffee table. For the first time in days, he exhaled, though the ache in his chest remained. Upstairs, Hannah turned on her side, unaware of the conversation below. She still hadn't decided when or if she would tell Nolan about the baby. But one thing was certain. She couldn't avoid the truth forever. The secret weighed heavier each day, and sooner or later, she would have to speak it aloud, and when she did, she needed to know Nolan was a man worth trusting again. The morning sun filtered through the curtains when Nolan finally gathered his courage. He had spoken the truth to Catherine, severed ties that never should have been formed. But words alone wouldn't heal what he had broken with Hannah. He needed to show her, not with flowers or promises, but with something lasting, something that proved she would never be second again. He found her in the kitchen, quietly pouring tea while Ruth hummed softly by the stove. Hannah looked tired, her curls pulled back in a loose bun, her expression guarded when she saw him. "Could I have a moment?" Nolan asked carefully. Ruth glanced at her daughter, then patted Hannah's arm. "I'll step outside," she said, slipping onto the porch and leaving them alone. Nolan took a breath. "Hannah, I know I can't erase what I've done, but I can change how I move forward. I told Catherine to never contact me again. She's out of the company, out of my life. That's done." Hannah sipped her tea, silent, waiting. "I also spoke with my COO," he continued. "I've stepped back from the day-to-day for now. But more than that, I want you to come into the company with me. I need someone I trust, not just professionally, but personally. Someone who will hold me accountable. I want you in the room, at the table, where no one can ever push me past the boundaries we set together. You'd have a leadership role in HR or any division you choose, not because you're my wife, but because you've always been the one I listen to, the one who keeps me grounded." Hannah blinked, surprised. Her practical side immediately stirred. "Nolan, you can't just hand me a position out of guilt. That's not how business works. This isn't guilt, it's recognition," he said, leaning forward, his voice thick with emotion. "You've sacrificed more for me than anyone, and I treated your love like it would always be there. I need you beside me, Hannah. Not behind me, not waiting down the hall while I run myself into the ground. Beside me." For a moment the air hung heavy between them. Hannah's chest tightened, her hand instinctively brushing against her stomach. She wasn't ready to tell him yet, not while she still questioned if she could believe his promises. But for the first time since leaving, she felt the faintest spark of hope. She set her cup down slowly. "We'll see, Nolan. Actions, not words. That's what matters, Nolan nodded, relief softening his face. Then I'll show you, every day, until you believe me again. The weekend air carried the smell of barbecue smoke and laughter as Ruth and David moved through the house, preparing for the family cookout. Nolan sat stiffly on the sofa, still unsure if he was welcome at such a gathering. When David passed by, grabbing his hat, he paused at the door. "Let's go," David said. Nolan looked up, startled. "Me? Yes, you," David replied firmly. "You need to meet the rest of the family and friends. They're Hannah's people, and if you want to fight for her, they need to see you." The drive was quiet, Hannah sitting between her mother and sister in the back seat, staring out the window. Nolan kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror, hoping for some sign she wasn't still holding herself shut. But she didn't meet his eyes once. When they arrived, the house and yard buzzed with voices, music, and the clatter of dominoes on tables set up under the trees. To Nolan's surprise, no one turned cold shoulders or whispered behind his back. Instead, family greeted him with polite warmth, treating him like he belonged. It was disarming, and it reminded him how much Hannah's world had always been open to him, even when he hadn't deserved it. The food line stretched across the yard, trays piled high with ribs, fried chicken, and potato salad. Nolan found himself beside Hannah, relieved at least to be close to her. As they filled their plates, her Aunt Carol, a woman with a sharp laugh and no filter, leaned over with a knowing smile. "Hannah, make sure you get enough for your baby," she said lightly. The words hit like a thunderclap. Hannah froze mid-step, her plate trembling in her hands. Her eyes snapped to her aunt, a stern, warning glare that said, "Not now, not like this." Carol's smile faltered, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh, Lord," she muttered, but it was too late. Nolan, standing right beside Hannah, felt the floor shift beneath him. He looked at her, his chest tightening. "Hannah?" he whispered, realization crashing into him. Her plate clattered to the ground, food scattering across the grass. Without a word, she spun around and stomped off, her shoulders stiff, her eyes already burning with tears. "Hannah, wait!" Nolan hurried after her, his heart pounding. He caught up with her near the side of the house, grabbing her hand just as she broke down. Tears streamed down her face, her body trembling with the weight of everything she'd been holding in. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice cracked, desperate. Her eyes flared with pain. "I was going to, but you were too busy having dinner with another woman. Too busy lying to me." Nolan's throat closed. Tears blurred his vision as he dropped to his knees in front of her, clinging to her hands. "I'm sorry. God, Hannah, I'm so sorry. I can't lose you. I can't lose our family. Please give me another chance. I'll spend every day proving to you that you come first. Please." His sobs shook him, raw and unrestrained. He pulled her into his arms, crying out loud, not caring who was watching from the porch or the yard. All he knew was the truth was finally out, and with it his desperate plea to keep the only family that mattered. Nolan's arms trembled as he held Hannah, his tears wet against her cheek. The weight of his desperation pressed into her, and for a moment she let herself simply breathe in his sorrow. For a week she had carried anger like armor, but hearing him cry, seeing him stripped of pride, stirred something deep inside her. "Nolan," she whispered, her voice breaking. He pulled back just enough to see her face, his eyes red, his chest heaving. "I'll do anything," he said again, gripping her hands like a lifeline. "I'll walk away from the company if I have to. I'll burn every bridge that comes between us. Just don't walk away from me. Don't walk away from us." Hannah looked at him long and hard, searching his face for the truth. And for the first time in a long while, she saw no defense, no excuses, only raw regret. Her heart, still bruised, wanted to believe him. "I don't want to walk away," she admitted softly. "I want this marriage. I want us. And I want our child to know what love looks like. But you hurt me, Nolan. That can't be erased overnight." "I know," he said quickly. "But I'll spend every day earning you back." Her tears finally spilled, and she let out a shaky breath. "Then I'll give you that chance. But don't ever make me feel second again. Not to work, not to anyone." He nodded fiercely, pulling her close once more. "Never again." As they clung to each other in the quiet shadow of her aunt's house, Hannah felt the smallest spark of hope. The road ahead would be long, but for the first time since she left, she believed they might find their way back. The days after the cookout felt fragile, like walking on glass. But Hannah had made her choice. To try again. Nolan didn't waste the chance. Every morning he rose early to help with chores around her parents' home, showing her family he wasn't just a man of words, but of effort. He mowed the lawn with David, carried groceries in for Ruth, even fixed the squeaky porch step without being asked. Small things, but Hannah noticed. In private, he sought her out gently, never pressing when she wasn't ready to talk. Instead of filling silence with apologies, he let his actions speak, whether it was bringing her a cup of tea in the evenings or sitting beside her on the porch swing, simply listening. For Nolan, it was uncharted territory, learning to be still, learning that love was built as much in quiet presence as in grand gestures. He also took steps with the company. One afternoon, he showed Hannah the official email he'd sent to his board. Catherine Dotson was no longer affiliated with the company in any capacity, and Nolan was reducing his direct involvement for the next several months to focus on family. He appointed his COO as interim lead and added a line Hannah didn't expect, effective immediately. Nolan Colbert will join the company in an advisory HR capacity, ensuring employee culture remains a top priority. When he handed her the printed email, his eyes were steady. You don't have to take it if you're not ready. But I want you to know your voice matters in my life, in my work, and I'll never let anyone push you aside again. Hannah read the words twice before folding the paper neatly. This is a start, she said quietly. They also agreed to counseling. Twice a week, they sat across from a local pastor who specialized in marriage restoration. It wasn't easy. The sessions dug up painful truths, raw admissions, and Hannah often left drained. But Nolan stayed by her side through every tear, every silence, every hard question. Little by little, trust began to mend. It wasn't whole, not yet, but each day laid another brick in the foundation they were rebuilding. And as Hannah felt the tiny flutter of life growing within her, she allowed herself to imagine not just surviving this storm, but finding joy again with the man she loved. 2 weeks after the cookout, Hannah finally allowed Nolan to accompany her to her first prenatal appointment. The drive to the small-town clinic was quiet, but not tense, more like anticipation humming in the air. Nolan gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, his eyes flicking to Hannah every few seconds. She noticed but said nothing, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. When the doctor dimmed the lights and the ultrasound screen flickered to life, the room shifted. A steady rhythm filled the air, the tiny heartbeat of their child. Hannah's eyes welled with tears, and Nolan reached for her hand instinctively, this time not afraid she would pull away. She didn't. Instead, she gripped him tightly, as though sharing this fragile miracle required both of them. That's your baby, the doctor smiled. Nolan's throat closed. He had sat through boardroom presentations, investor pitches, and endless negotiations, but nothing in his life had ever shaken him like the sound of that heartbeat. Our baby, he whispered, his voice cracking, for the first time since everything fell apart. Hannah let herself smile at him, not fully, not without shadows, but with genuine warmth. The news spread quickly through the family. Ruth already planning meals and knitted blankets. David, though reserved, walked out to the porch with Nolan later that evening. You've got even more to fight for now, he said simply, his gaze steady. Nolan nodded, swallowing hard, knowing exactly what was at stake. The pregnancy became a bridge for healing. Nolan insisted on being at every appointment. He read parenting books at night, leaving them stacked by the bed like sacred texts. When nausea hit, he made ginger tea and sat beside her until it passed. When Hannah grew restless, he suggested slow evening walks through the neighborhood, his hand always steady at her back. There were still moments of doubt. Hannah's mind sometimes replayed the image of him at the restaurant, laughter shared with someone else. But then she'd glance at him folding tiny baby clothes, his brow furrowed as if he were handling precious silk, and she'd feel a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, this family could survive. Their child had become more than a new chapter. It was the thread weaving them back together, stitch by fragile stitch. The morning of Hannah's baby shower was supposed to be filled with laughter and balloons, but instead, she woke with sharp cramps that stole her breath. At first, she thought they were false alarms, but when the pains came more consistently, she grabbed her phone with trembling hands and called her mother. Her voice cracked as she said, "Mom, I think it's time." Within an hour, her parents were on the road, rushing toward the hospital. Nolan's steady presence anchored her through the whirlwind. He drove her carefully, his knuckles white around the steering wheel, glancing at her every few seconds. "I've got you, Hannah," he whispered, as if the words could ease her pain. By the time they reached the hospital, her contractions had quickened. Nurses whisked her into a gown and onto a bed, while Nolan stayed close. Refusing to let go of her hand, her Auntie Carol, who had been preparing decorations and food back at her home, called in tears when she learned the shower had turned into a hospital visit. "Don't worry about us, baby girl," she said. "This little one just wanted to be the star of the show." The doctor came in, smiling with calm reassurance. "It won't be long now," he said after checking her progress. Relief washed over Nolan, though worry still clung to him. He leaned close to Hannah, brushing damp curls from her forehead. "Breathe with me," he encouraged, his voice low and soothing. Together, they inhaled and exhaled in rhythm, his words and touch guiding her through every wave of pain. Hours blurred into moments of deep intensity. Hannah clutched Nolan's hand, sometimes squeezing so hard he winced, but he never let go. His whispered promises, "I'm right here, we're almost there, you're so strong," wrapped around her like a blanket. And then, suddenly, there was a cry, a high, piercing sound that filled the sterile room with life. The nurses placed a tiny, wriggling bundle on Hannah's chest. Tears streamed down her face as she stared at her son's soft features, his tiny fists balled tight against his cheeks. All the pain, all the exhaustion, dissolved the moment she felt his warmth against her skin. Nolan bent over them, tears slipping freely from his eyes. "He's perfect," he whispered, his voice breaking. Hannah looked up at him, her heart swelling. In that moment, with their child between them, they cried together tears of relief, joy, and the overwhelming truth that they had been given a fresh start as a family. When the nurses cleaned and swaddled their son, Hannah leaned back against the pillows, exhausted but glowing. Nolan sat beside her, one hand resting gently on the baby's tiny back. He could hardly believe this moment was real, that after everything, here they were, holding the family he had nearly lost. Their parents peek into the room, their eyes shining with pride and joy. Auntie Carol slipped in quietly behind them, wiping away tears. "I guess he decided he didn't need a shower," she whispered with a watery laugh. Hannah chuckled softly, still weak but full of love. For the first time in a long time, Nolan felt surrounded not by business meetings or empty nights, but by family. The next morning, when they were discharged, Nolan insisted on carrying the baby carrier himself. He handled it like the most precious cargo in the world, double-checking the straps, holding it steady, as if even the slightest bump could disturb their child. Hannah walked beside him, her hand brushing against his arm, and for the first time since their struggles began, she let herself lean on him completely. Back at their home, their parents' place, the nursery they had prepared together now felt alive. Soft blues and gentle yellows covered the walls. Tiny clothes hung neatly in drawers, and the crib stood waiting. Nolan carefully placed their son inside, then stepped back, his arm sliding around Hannah's waist. For a long moment, they just stood there in silence, watching their son sleep. "He's our second chance," Nolan whispered, pulling Hannah closer. She turned to him, tears welling again, but this time they were tears of peace. "No," she said softly, resting her head against his chest. "He's our forever." In that quiet nursery, with the sunlight streaming through the curtains and their baby breathing softly nearby, Hannah and Nolan finally found what they had both been searching for. Not perfection, not the polished life they once thought mattered, but family, love, and a promise that no matter what storms came their way, they would face them together. It wasn't just the end of their struggles. It was the beginning of their new life, a story of forgiveness, of healing, and of a love strong enough to build a home around the tiniest heartbeat. A year later, back in the city, the Colbert home was no longer the quiet, polished space it once had been. Toys littered the living room floor, tiny socks somehow found their way beneath couch cushions, and a high chair stood like a throne at the dining table. To Nolan and Hannah, it was perfect chaos, life as they had never known it, yet life they wouldn't trade for anything. Their son Micah had just turned 1. He was toddling now, those wobbly steps that made Nolan's heart leap with pride and terror all at once. Hannah often laughed, saying she never saw her husband run faster than when Micah lost his balance. Parenthood had humbled Nolan in ways the boardroom never could. He learned that sleepless nights and spit-stained shirts didn't lessen him. They grounded him. No investor meeting had ever compared to hearing Micah's first laugh or watching him grip Hannah's finger with all the trust in the world. For Hannah, motherhood softened some edges while sharpening others. She had found strength she never knew she carried, patience tested in midnight feedings and fevers. But she also found healing. Every time she watched Nolan cradle their son, every time he chose to step away from work to be present, her trust stitched itself stronger. They still had their struggles. Parenthood brought exhaustion, new arguments, and the challenge of balancing responsibilities. But unlike before, they faced those struggles together. They had learned that love wasn't about perfection, but about showing up day after day for each other and their child. On Micah's first birthday, family filled their home. Auntie Carol carried the cake with pride, Ruth snapped endless pictures, and David held Micah high like a prize. When Nolan slipped his arm around Hannah's waist, she leaned into him, her smile soft but sure. "We've come a long way," she murmured. Nolan kissed her temple, watching their son clap his hands with cake smeared across his cheeks. "And we're just getting started." For the first time in a long time, Hannah believed him, not because of his words, but because of everything he had shown her in the year since their son's birth. Love had been tested, but it had endured. And now, it was flourishing in ways she had only dreamed. Thank you for listening to Green Tea Tales. Hope you enjoyed this story. Help support our channel with like, share, comment, and don't forget to subscribe.